How's it going, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Mavs Step Back Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Trigg. Today, I am joined by my DallasBasketball.com colleague. He does great work for us over there, Grant Afseth. You can find him at Grant Afseth on Twitter. You can find myself at Dalton_Trigg. Grant has been a globetrotter this offseason. He has been everywhere, and I mean literally everywhere. I mean from the draft to summer league to even going over and covering FIBA in the Philippines and Japan, and so he has been all over the place. He's done a great job covering all of that stuff. But Grant, first of all, have you rested up yet? Because if I was gone as long as you were, I would be in bed for a week straight. So congrats to you on not doing that. But how are you feeling right now?
Oh yeah, pretty good for sure. I feel like it definitely takes a little bit of time to get used to what time of day it is. 14 hours difference in Japan and then 12 hours in the Philippines was definitely interesting. So yeah, just in time for training camp for sure.
Yeah, you got a few days off until that comes up. So I mean, just what were the major differences aside from just the time zone? What as far as covering the teams and all that? Because for example, I saw you mention it several times on Twitter. We talked about it. They have like that mixed zone thing where after the game, it's not just straight to press conferences. They had that little feature thrown in there. So what was all that about?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like they basically make most of the in theory, not practice. Most of the players are supposed to walk through that area where it's kind of like a walking path out of the game court, and then kind of first they hit like the rights holders, if you will, like the people who are broadcasting the game, like ESPN, and they'll get like whoever they want really there, and then the other part is where like people like me or the other reporters who are not like with ESPN or FIBA kind of just hope to talk to somebody like someone has the right to definitely like walk by you and just kind of ignore you. But like the idea was like Josh Green, for example, like after an Australia game, I asked him if he'd be interested or willing to answer a couple questions, and he was nice enough to do that. And in theory, you're supposed to be able to do that with a lot of players, but when you get to like Manila, with everyone pooling in, going to the same games and stuff, it's. I took a couple pictures of it. I'll have to send it or post it. It was crazy the amount of people that were focused on like especially Team USA. But yeah, overall it was crazy how packed it was for sure.
Well, it was a great tournament to be able to cover because, I mean, from top to bottom, there were exciting games everywhere. You had, Team USA getting upset, not just once, but even in the third place game against Canada, they got beat in overtime. So that was really exciting. Germany just went on an incredible run, top to finish, didn't lose once during the actual tournament. And somehow Dennis Schroeder ends up winning MVP despite shooting 4 of 26 in the semifinals. So, lots of good stuff. Serbia made it to the World Cup final without Nikola Jokic. There's a lot of talent. And, I mean, that's been one of the big topics over the last couple of weeks since the World Cup ended is, has the gap closed enough now to where Team USA isn't always a lock, or is it more of the case of, well, Team USA just doesn't send their best talent, or their best talent isn't as committed as other countries' best talent is? So, and I mean, I think it's an interesting argument because, after all that happened, it's like, oh, well, LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Durant and so on, they're all now interested in joining Team USA for the Olympics next summer, which is great. I mean, obviously that boosts their chances. They'd be heavy favorites to win it all. But I still think there's enough talent going around, with the other countries to where even that team wouldn't be a lock, in my opinion. They have a very good chance, but, there are several really good teams that were missing really good players in the World Cup that still made it, further than what Team USA did. So, I mean, what's your take on that? Is it has the gap worldwide closed in a little bit on Team USA, or is this just a matter of, well, the best players weren't there and that's pretty much it?
I think it's a combination of both, especially in the World Cup years as opposed to the Olympic years. I think the last time, if I remember correctly, that USA won a medal, like not even like gold, just a medal, was when Kyrie Irving won MVP in
Yeah,
2014, I believe. So I think like a
that's right.
lot of the times, even with the, I think there's like a little bit of nuance as well too with like the certain positions as well with talent, like the big man position. USA relied on Jaren Jackson at the 5 a lot, and other teams. They're basically the team that like Embiid. Well, he's a free agent, but like potentially Embiid with France or Cameroon or maybe USA. Who knows? But like mostly like Jokic, plays for Serbia. A lot of the like Rudy Gobert plays for France. Like a lot of those like bigger like stars, bigs, if you will. They're kind of like their nationality is not for USA. So that's more of a challenge. You have to like in FIBA World Cup years dig deeper for the recruitment and then trust a player like a Walker Kessler to maybe handle more. And I think they definitely were reluctant to fully utilize that. I think their gamble was they wanted to go small with Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5, and I think that backfired. Like, because I guess with every team, whether it's national team or NBA team, there's always like a theory of like what you want to do with your team construction, and sometimes it just sort of blows up after you kind of realize like, okay, well, the physicality is too high. We're not containing on the perimeter enough to help like mitigate having smaller players in our front court. And I think that's kind of what happened with Team USA. So I'm definitely interested to see what the center position, will look like going forward, because I think they did have a lot of talent on the perimeter. But, like whether it's Bam Adebayo or, someone like that, I think that would be very important, or Anthony Davis for their chances. But during the FIBA World Cup years, I feel like those players at least this year, were not available to be able to fully stock up. But then again, they weren't available for Serbia either.
Yeah.
So it's not like a one size fits all problem or the only problem. But yeah, overall, I'm definitely curious to see like some of those things, like who they go with at the 5, like who actually commits, who's healthy enough to play, because a lot of those players are in their 30s as well, and who knows, some of those players like Jokic for Serbia, they won the title, so he, like naturally, a lot of times if you make it to conference finals or I mean, Schroeder's an exception, but to the finals and win it all, you may not be in a position to where you're going to sign up to play internationally, but Olympic years are definitely different. So there's definitely a lot of layers as I'm like talking it out. Like
they're really.
like
I mean,
exceptions to different things and all that stuff for sure.
it really is, and I mean, USA. We're always going to be able to get buckets. Team USA is going to be able to score the ball whenever they want to. But, Team USA's most dominant years in the Olympics or World Cup or whatever, I feel like the biggest thing has been able to guard, defensively, having that athleticism, that length on the wing, toughness down low. I think of Tyson Chandler, back in the day, who has an undefeated record as a member of Team USA throughout his career. And I mean, that kind of leads me into my next point here. Obviously, it's not going to happen, this year, next year, maybe even the next couple of years. But it's at some point, you have to wonder if a guy like Derek Lively can work his way into that Team USA center role, especially being mentored by Tyson Chandler, who excelled in that role. And, everybody's saying he has a lot of the intangibles that Chandler had. Maybe even higher potential than I think. Obviously, he has higher potential, and whether he reaches it or not is yet to be seen. But a guy like that could be your answer for Team USA at center in the foreseeable future. But I mean, what do you think of the idea of Lively potentially getting thrown into the mix there?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for like a dirty work specialist who doesn't need the ball in his hands, can really rim roll and like protect the rim and maybe do a little bit of switching. I think that would be the perfect sort of fit. I do think in like recent like Team USA like sort of runs, if you will, like whether it's Olympics or FIBA World Cup, I feel like those like sort of finesse centers, they kind of struggle with those. Like I remember, Miles Turner. Uh, he didn't necessarily have like the best FIBA World Cup. Jaren Jackson playing the five didn't have the best like rebounding became a real problem. Like with Miles Turner, it was a problem, but with Jaren Jackson, it was like a
Jaren
real problem.
Jackson had less than 3 rebounds a game, I think,
Yeah, yeah, and then his
which is
minutes were
insane.
so low because like I guess if you were to list all the downsides of like what could go wrong with this as an option, I feel like everything did. Like even his minutes were like I believe under like 20 per game because he
Yeah.
fouled so much. Like I feel like that's definitely a big part of it as well. Is like you got to have like the like someone who's gonna like not get into foul trouble all the time, who can handle different like a couple coverages, so you're not like giving the same looks. Like you don't want like a slow-footed like drop coverage big man who's gonna just get like kind of feasted on, doing like the same drop coverage and things like that. But I think Derek Lively has a lot of qualities that I think you would want. Like if he develops and is ideally who like a lot of people expect him to be. Coming out of the draft. With the shot blocking, he's a good rebounder. But I do think for him, one of the things I'm curious to watch over the first couple years of his career will be how he handles those like more physical, imposing like center matchups, like against like well, obviously everyone against like a Jokic is gonna struggle. Like even Anthony
Yeah.
Davis couldn't handle
Yeah.
that one. But like just in general, like how he handles like even like I guess you could say like non-star like Daniel Tice type physical players, like if you're talking about international basketball, like how he handles those types of players, because that was definitely a downside or a struggle at times for him at Duke, was handling sort of those more physically imposing matchups.
Well, and then you mentioned Jokic and how everybody struggled. People used to give me so much crap for this take, but if you go back and watch the games, it's true. When the Mavs had Willie Cauley-Stein on the team, for whatever reason, his length, like the way he played Jokic, it just bothered Jokic. And Jokic you go back and look at those games that the Mavs played against the Nuggets, they might have given up almost 30 points to Jokic. But when you look at, he was shooting like 13 of 30 or something like that in those games. And that's just because, Cauley-Stein was just one of those guys that gave him problems. It's just like back in the Dirk Nowitzki era, that Golden State Warriors team had guys that just gave Dirk problems. Matt Barnes and guys like that. It's just one of those things. So maybe Derek Lively can be one of those people.
Yeah, with a 7'7", 7'8". Other places have different measures for what his wingspan is, but like one of the things that's really interesting about him that I noticed, like when you're close, like kind of on the level of the court, like in Vegas, he is really tough to shoot over. Like he plays up and like the ball screens and the guard tries to pull up, they're barely getting shots off over him. So like maybe he could be a disruptive presence as he kind of handles the way the Mavs want him to play up in ball screen coverages for, like that could be applicable to, international basketball, to make it hard on the guard. The court's, smaller to operate in with how you can kind of pack the paint. Maybe how he handles guarding 2 with 1. That's another thing they want to focus on. If he can develop all the things that the Mavericks would like him to develop in and kind of harness his strengths, I think he'd be a really interesting player in that sort of context, because there's not a lot of guards that I guess like if you will, that are like super dynamic scorers, like amazing playmakers, and have a teammate at the 5 who are just phenomenal, like all around like floor spacing threats and interior guys. Like I think it'd be like a way to attack most teams if the ideal version of what you hope you get from Derek Lively ends up being what you get from Derek Lively for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to see, how this first season goes for him. I think he's going to be more of a factor than what most people probably realize. It looks like, and I talked about this with with Legends head coach Jordan Sears last week. But, I told him, I was like, what have y'all been doing? Because from what we've seen in like these little clips that get posted and everything, it looks like they took him after Summer League and just locked him in the weight room and left him there until now. Because he looks like he's, bulked up a little bit. And, he was just saying how relentless both Lively and Omax Prosper's work ethic is. Like they are just gym rats. And the same was said about Jaden Hardy last year, just a guy that you can't get out of the gym, coming in late at night, being there early in the morning. Like they're always working on their game. So, that kind of work ethic, that kind of dedication at 19 years old, I mean, he may not start from day one, but I think he's going to play a big role from day one. And I think making things simple for a center is the key to success early on for him in his NBA career. And it will be pretty simple, set screens, block shots, catch lobs. That's about as simple as you can get for a center coming into the league. So I'm excited about that. We are going to move on from the FIBA stuff. One point I did want to make before we did move on, though, is you feel like Team USA would have looked at Jaren Jackson's constant foul problems in the NBA before going over to play internationally, where things, in my opinion, are a little bit more physical. So it's like, what were you expecting? I mean, obviously he's going to end up having foul trouble. So, that you live and you learn there. So I don't know if he'll be back with Team USA or not. But anyway, so moving on, we have a couple of Mavs things that have happened here lately as we get closer to training camp. I'm literally just going down our DallasBasketball.com page here, but you have Mavs player development coach God Shamgod. He did a podcast here recently and basically said that they're going to see this year, talking about Kyrie Irving having a redemption type of year, which I can see. I mean, look, we've talked about it before. The Mavs, when they traded for Kyrie, that was never meant to be a last year type of move. It was meant to be a future move. And they did go out and they signed him to a future deal. They've retooled the roster around him and Luka. There have been hints. Obviously, the players haven't been mentioned by names, but there were hints that there were issues in the locker room with players not liking the role that they were being asked to do. And then, conveniently, after all that came out, the Mavs end up not signing Christian Wood. They end up waiving JaVale McGee. Over 50% of the roster has overturned now. You got Grant Williams, former 3-and-D Celtics forward. You've got Seth Curry back for his third stint. You've got potentially valuable veteran minimum contract guys like Dante Exum and Derek Jones Jr. You've got Rashawn Holmes, who is still on the roster. There was a lot of speculation about he might get traded retraded before the season starts, and that still could happen. But if not, I mean, given the Mavs front court situation over the last handful of years, I could see him being helpful, even though he's not a good defender. So I mean, there's a lot of, and then the rookies that we've talked about, Lively and Prosper. I mean, there's a lot more to be excited about this upcoming season. But what do you think specifically about Shamgod's take on Kyrie Irving getting ready to have a redemption year, so to speak?
Yeah, I think a lot of the narrative surrounding like Kyrie in general and the Mavs, like the way the trade kind of transpired, I think a lot of it has to do with just looking at the overall record. I feel like in general, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily look kind of beyond like opening up the ESPN scores app and then
I
see, oh, the Mavericks
100%
lost
agree.
again. Yeah, like I think
100%.
yeah, like in general, I feel like a lot of the narrative is tied to the success because like if like of the win loss column because if they start to lose games, I feel like a lot of it is just an assumption where it's like, oh, here goes Kyrie Irving again. His team is, his whatever team he's on is, not winning at all without LeBron or whatever. Like I feel like that's kind of just the jumped on conclusion. But I think overall, like there's a lot of nuance to adjusting to a team. Like I think overall, statistically, as we saw, the general like impact when him and Luka were on the court together, they were very potent offensively. But there was times where they're like in clutch time where they were getting used to like, okay, so you want the ball in this spot, or okay, you got it. You take the ball in this spot and you got it. Like it's kind of like a feel out process. Like any team with dynamic talents who are used to being the closer are going to have to, get used to deferring, or this is just the way we're going to attack things. So I think like, a couple games got lost with that, like not as the sole reason, because ideally if you execute better earlier in a game defensively, because they were like a pretty dreadful defensive team last year, maybe you're not having to rely on closing time while you're adjusting on the fly to a new star being on your team. But I think overall, like as Kyrie said frequently, like throughout that period, like in his post-game press conferences and stuff, like they were going through the ugly part in must-win games that most people on other teams were going through in training camp and early in the season. They didn't have that luxury. So they're like figuring each other out while other teams have more continuity than them. And that can be costly, whether it's defensive rotations, even knowing what style everyone wants to play with, and all that stuff. So I'm curious to see, like, well, especially as like someone who writes about it and everything, like as we do, I'm very curious to get like his thoughts, like in the training camp, about how they're gonna like what he sees as being valuable, what's being worked on with the training camp, and then also like Luka as well, his thoughts, like Jason Kidd's thoughts, and just overall like a lot of that stuff I think is important to kind of hear about, and I think that will all factor into a more successful team-wide season, because individually he was very effective until he had like that little stretch like towards the end. I think like I remember that, like I just remember vividly because of my Motel 6 excursion at 3 a.m. in Charlotte. But I remember asking him in Charlotte about like his plantar fasciitis. He didn't play like to his usual standard against the 2-game stretch against Charlotte. And then he said, yeah, I'm like working through this like foot stuff, and it's hard to kind of like handle that on the fly while you're trying to heal and all that stuff, and it's not fully healed. So I think like between that and Luka dealing with the initial part of him dealing with that the thigh injury or quad injury, whatever you want to call it, at the same time, I feel like that it was kind of like as we said with Team USA and Jaren Jackson, you list all the downsides of what could go wrong. A lot of it did go wrong, but now you have more of a time to adjust in training camp, and then they also retooled the roster in different spots, and there's little things about that could go well, could go wrong. But overall, at least there's a different look, and there's more of a, I guess you could say, with like as we said with the rookies, like especially like being around them in Vegas, they both very much know their roles, and like going into it, like that's not something a lot of rookies know. Like a lot of them are figuring out who they are as a player and who their team is, and they'll have to adjust to going against NBA personnel and like the little nuances of the role, like learning the system, especially Derek Lively as the anchor of the defense. But at least the core of it all is they know their job. And that, I don't think necessarily there was clarity in a way, like from like everything involved on like what jobs were like as like, people have said, like not everyone was on the same page about roles and like what their responsibilities were. So they're, at least the young guys, even at least with them, they'll know their job.
Well, and it helps too. And I keep going back to that last interview we did with Jordan Sears, but it's not just Sears though. Everybody we've talked to since the draft has said the same thing, and it's that these guys, these rookies, aren't your typical rookies when it comes to like maturity and being accepting of those type of dirty work roles, so to speak. I mean that's one thing I'm really excited about, because it's hard to find young guys who have such a clarity about that coming into the league, and I think that's really going to help them from the jump. And I'm really excited to see how that progresses throughout the year. Another thing you were talking, yeah, I mean, you talked about how there's nuances to, you know, stuff like how the Mavs ended last season, and a lot of people ignore that stuff. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, I mean, obviously, chemistry has something to do with it. The roster had something to do with it because you gave up. I mean, Kyrie is far and away better than Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith. But, you know, in reality, you gave up 2 starters and you got back 1. So, I mean, you're obviously going to be a little bit at a disadvantage there. So you had depth issues. You had the chemistry thing, like you said, trying to build chemistry and win in the toughest part of that building chemistry process when it's must-win games. But then most importantly, you had the end of the season injury issues. Not, you know, Kyrie with the plantar fasciitis. You had Luka with that nagging thigh injury that he's still, you know, it's still surfaced in FIBA play. And we'll have to see, we'll keep an eye on that as we go into training camp and preseason and all that and see how he's doing. But, you know, all of that just hit at once and it created just a disaster. And then, you know, with all that stuff happening, all that bad luck, you can't blame the Mavs for getting to those last 2 games of the season and realizing how small their chances were of even making the play in. And so they tanked those last 2 games, and then the national media just became the most highly moral people I've ever seen in my life. With how they condemned the Mavs for doing that, but with how it turned out, you know, if I had to have the Mavs miss the play in and lose their top 10 pick versus they kept the pick, they turned it into Lively, they turned it into Prosper and Rashawn Holmes, and they got off of Davis Bertans' contract. I'm glad they did what they did. So it makes things a lot more interesting for us personally going into the season and for them going into the season too. So I'm glad it worked out the way it did. All of the holier than thou people talking about tanking 2 games and ignoring the other teams that tanked for half of a season, you know, or tanking from
Take a trip
All-Star
up
break.
I-35. There might be a
Yeah.
team that's been doing some tanking the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any juicy headlines, I guess, though. So you know what, it is what it is. But I'll never understand. That still irks me that, you know, that people made such a big deal out of that when it was the obvious move. I mean, what else were they supposed to do? So anyway,
I think
I'm
overall
excited.
with that stuff, there was definitely like some risk of like if you upset Luka Doncic about tanking, but you got like if you don't hit on the draft and all that stuff. But it all comes down to regardless, you just have to do a good job with how you manage the draft. And I felt like if they would have like say they would have drafted someone who became a draft bust, we don't know how all those players will play out now, like with Derek Lively and Prosper. Like there's reasons to be confident in all of them. But
Yeah,
say like if they stayed in their spot, they drafted a bust. That might have been tough to say like that was the right move. But I feel like it's all outcome based in a sense where it's like, okay, now that you're taking that risk of tanking, you got to like now get the job done on draft day. And I feel like they definitely did a very effective job. Like as you said, like getting off the Davis Bertans contract. I remember writing all these articles where it was like they'll probably have to attach something just to get rid of him. Well, you attached 2 draft spots and you got a center that you can
yeah,
develop to be an anchor. That's something I didn't expect, but you know, like that is a very like deserves credit of a move. And then you look at other things as well, like coming away with a big wing that looks like he's pro ready with his build, like 6'8". Like remember with Omax in Vegas, we saw him next to Benedict Mathurin, and like yeah,
yes,
like he looks very like physically NBA ready. Like you stand next to the guy, he's huge. Like it's like that's usually not something that you get from a rookie from the jump. So like I thought they did a very effective job, and like that's like at the time, like when they decided to do the tanking, it's like you know you look at like players like okay if you stay at 10, obviously you're gonna have to draft well. Like Mikal Bridges is one of the few players in the last like 10 drafts with the 10th pick that was like you would say, okay, that was worth being the 10th pick with a bad season. A lot of them were like rough players, like for the outcomes. But, you know, that's to be expected. Like it all comes, again, back down to the outcome based stuff where it's like, just do your job on draft
yeah,
day. It has to go well. And I feel like it's early to for anybody to say like it's perfect and like great job on the draft like too much yet, but like with any team. But I feel like it's reason to have a lot of confidence in what they could develop with what they have, and I feel like that getting the job done when you take those risks is definitely the theme, and I feel like there's reason to have confidence in that heading into the season for sure.
Well, even from a practical standpoint, and first of all, Luka's never gonna say, "Oh yeah, well we did the right thing by not." I mean, he's not gonna do it. That's that's kind of the politically correct answer from Luka every time you ask him about something like that, because obviously he's gonna say, "I want to be out there playing." But from a practical standpoint, from a logic standpoint, since now if OKC had lost out and the Mavs still tanked, then and they had a chance to get that last spot and they didn't, then maybe Luka would have like a reason to be upset.
Yeah, mathematically, it feels like a lot of people didn't know that, like, even if they had won
Yeah,
out, that, like, following that Sacramento game, that third to last game, I believe, they played really well and they won. But then it's like those last two games, in the end, they still would have, like,
yeah,
you go 2-0, you still don't make it for sure.
right. And then as soon as that happens, it's like all of the outrage should have just stopped. It's like, okay, well they were right. Like,
Yeah, and then like
this was
even
the
if,
best
even if they just
choice.
organically like played everybody and lost out, like let's say that happened, even though those teams were bad and they probably wanted their own, like at least San Antonio for sure wanted to get that last little loss probably because they ended up with Wembanyama. But even if that happened, I feel like it all comes back again to what we've been saying. It's like you still have to do well in the draft, no matter what. It doesn't matter how you get there, why you get there, and what you did to get there. It's just like you still have to just come away from a season where you went 38 and 44 and you got to do well in the draft. And I feel like definitely they impressed me with how they came away with an extra pick. They got off Bertans. They got a
Yeah,
veteran big man who's like at least a good stopgap option. Like as you said, like he's not a defensive anchor, but at least he's got some qualities that could be a helpful player. And if he's not, you're not like super locked into this commitment. You can probably move off of him at some point. So I think overall there's a lot of things to like about it. And that's even before getting into free agency as well. Like Grant Williams is a helpful player. They added some solid role players on low cost deals like Seth Curry, Derek Jones. Like they at least have, like, as what a lot of people like to, like, when you analyze a rotation, you want to have players that are at least elite at something, like Seth Curry, an elite shooter. Derek Jones has a lot of athleticism. You can play him at different spots. So there's like more options, I feel like, with this roster than being kind of stuck with not even like being great at the identity that you're stuck with. That's, I think, a big
yeah,
problem with last year is like even like after the trade, something that like, I feel like we talked about a couple times on the show is like at the 4, they almost had no answer, like viable answer. Like Reggie Bullock at 200 pounds is not a 4. You're not going to
no,
have that guy doing low man rotations and like containing on switches, all that stuff. Like that's not probably great. You need a rim protector at the 5 to make that viable. And then you look at like I think like in March they started to, I feel like, kind of acknowledge that with their actions. They're like, okay, this isn't going to work. So let's go with bigs. Let's just try that. And I feel like when you're just trying stuff to try stuff in March, I feel like you're probably not in a great position as a roster overall.
yeah, probably not gonna work. Yeah, March should be the cruising time. Like you should have a pretty good idea of where you're gonna be at. It was just a big mess last year, and hopefully, and I really do think. I mean, obviously, there's levels to this. How much better will they be? I think it's a given that they will be better. How much better, I don't know, but I think they'll definitely be better than what we witnessed last year or at the end of last year. So,
Yeah, because a lot of it
it,
has to do with like what's going on at that given time. Like for all we know, like if you think back to, even if you analyze things in mid March and you talk about a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, or actually I don't remember exactly when John Morant started to have the off the court problems, the stories that led to the kind of like to kind of derail a bit of their season.
yeah,
Like you can't predict things like that. Like who knows like what's going to happen, and they get bounced as a 2 seed to the Lakers in the first round, and then all of a sudden the Lakers are in the Western Conference Finals. Like things
yeah,
went really well for the Lakers at the right time, and you just never know when either side of that will happen to your team. Like, who knows? Like, maybe they stay healthy and things go well, and then they're available to make a big run. Or who knows? Maybe Luka's quad injury is a problem, and Kyrie Irving at 31, 32 has some, foot problems over the next like 1 or 2. Who knows? Like, there's all kinds of things that could go well, could go wrong. But
This
in
season
theory,
could turn into the Jaden Hardy show. Who knows?
yeah, for sure.
we'll,
Like for all
we'll
we
have to
know,
see.
yeah, and that would be very interesting too, because it's like they use the summer league to develop him, and there's like, okay, there's work to be done. So that's like, what work did he do in between? Like you talked about with Jordan Sears, the work that got done there. Like, who knows? Like, there's a lot of things that could go well, could go wrong, and all I know is that we'll be at like every single game writing about it. So that'll
Oh,
be
yeah.
fun.
Well, we are officially, let's see, when does training camp start? The 30th?
27th, I believe, is the.
So we are single-digit days away from training camp, from Mavs Media Day and training camp, and yeah, we're gonna get the ball rolling here very shortly. It's crept up on us. It's been a very fun summer from top to bottom. I think where. I mean, I'm just being honest here. I'm not calling out anybody, but I feel like where a lot of people have kind of, laid down and taken the summer off, we've kind of plowed through it, and we have put out a lot of great content this summer. Both on the pod and on DallasBasketball.com, and with the way it's set up, with the revamped roster and Kyrie and Luka having an off season together, I feel like it's setting up to be an even better season than we had off season. So I'm excited about that. You do a great job, Grant, covering all this stuff. We appreciate all the work you do. Keep it up. It's going to be a very fun season for you. I can't wait to see what comes from all that. But I'm very excited to see how the Mavs do here in the next few months. So to start
Looking
the season.
ahead to that preseason period, all I gotta say is I'm glad I have my passport.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Grant will be in Abu Dhabi. He will also be in Madrid for that Mavs versus Real Madrid preseason game, which should be pretty fun. Luka going up against his old squad. That'll be interesting.
And old Mav legend Campazzo as well.
Oh yeah. Social media sensation. I think that's the most social media engagement the Mavs got in the last handful of years, just from that one signing.
There's from Argentina, there's Messi, and then there's Campazzo.
Yeah. So they'll get to benefit from that maybe a little bit more too. So, well, guys, look, we appreciate y'all joining us for yet another episode of the Mavs Step Back Podcast. Be sure to go like, rate, and subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you like watching us over there. Our YouTube channel has been on fire all summer, so be sure to go do that. And I've got some shirts on the way. I've got a dirt related shirt. I've got some DallasBasketball.com shirts. I've got some samples, but I don't have the actual shirts yet. When those come in, we are going to do some giveaways before the season starts. I think another 2 weeks before I actually get the full batch of those shirts coming in. So be on the lookout for that. And again, you can find myself at Dalton_Trigg, and you can find Grant at Grant Afseth on Twitter. We appreciate it, guys. Y'all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Y'all have a good one.